Hello Steelers, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to show you how I painted and weathered this 3D printed house. This is a 15mm scale building, but the techniques here will work well for any other scale buildings as well. I got this from Paul over at Sabotaged along with the garden, so I'm going to thank him for providing the model. I'll link all the materials that I used in the description below. The first thing to do is to base the model, and for this I used 2mm thick plasticard. This is going to raise the house to the height of the garden and also provide for a small bit of pavement at the front so the house doesn't just sit flat on the tabletop. I first measure and cut the plasticard, leaving a couple of centimetres for the pavement and then just round off the corners. Using some super glue, I glue the house to the card and then let it set. Then I use some embossed plasticard to make the pavement. I need to cut out the areas for the door frame and also the downpipe of the gutter just to make sure it fits flush against the house. Then I use polystyrene cement to glue all of this in place. Finally, I cut a small piece of plasticard out to use as the doorstep, and this also covers the area that I cut out of the embossed plasticard. It's not perfect, but don't worry, no one's going to notice this when it's on the table. Once the glue on the plasticard is dry, I start to undercoat the model. You can do this with a rattle can or an airbrush, but I use a big brush and am painted on acrylic paint. This is burnt umber, and it's a cheap acrylic that I got in a huge tub from a discount art shop. Just make sure you cover everything, as this will give you a good base for the next layers of paint. Once this undercoat is dried, it's then time to start block colouring the model. For the render, I'm using German Camo Beige by Vallejo, but you can use whatever you like. Houses are painted in a massive variety of colours, so let your imagination go wild and add a bit of colour to the tabletop. I just roughly get this on using a big brush and going quickly. I wouldn't worry too much about being neat at this point, or even getting even coverage, as this will help the weathering processes later anyway. But I'll usually go back and just do a second coat anyway, just to be sure. The roof is next, and I paint this with Vallejo's German Grey. I do the same thing as the render and just use a big brush for quick coverage. You might want to slightly water it down just to get in between all the tiles and those details. The exposed brick is then painted with antique brick by Decor Art. This is another cheap acrylic, but again use whatever brick colour you like or even stonework here. Whatever works for the building that you're painting. I don't worry about overspilling the paint here, as I can always go back with the render colour and cut in where I need it, just to neaten things up. I use the same colour for the bricks on the garden wall. Again, just working quickly and easily with a large brush. Buildings are large items to paint, so anything you can do to speed up the process is always a bonus. I follow the same technique with painting the painted windows and door frames. I like to do each building with a different colour for these, as it breaks up the look across the table. I use a medium-sized brush for this, as I want to be neat, but again, I don't worry too much, as I can always go back and neaten everything up with the render colour anyway. Using Vallejo Stone Grey, I then paint the pavements at the front and also the steps in the garden. These will be weathered separately to the rest of the building. Then I use Vallejo's Neutral Grey to dry brush the roof. This is a very simple job of wiping off as much paint from your paintbrush as possible and gently wiping it over the grain of the model. Work slowly at first and wipe off as much paint as you can, as it's easier to add rather than to take away if your brush is too heavily loaded with paint. The last thing in the block painting stage is to paint in the black on the downpipes and the wall braces. Again, these could be painted any way you like, but I like the black look, as it looks as though they've been painted with some kind of rust-proof paint. Try to be neat on these braces, as they are quite small. But before I cut in again with the render colour, I dry brush the brickwork with Vallejo's German Camo Orange. This is a very nice contrast to the dark red of the brick colour, and it also really brings out some of the details. Same as before, use a small amount of paint and work up the dry brushing. I also go over the bricks for the garden wall as well. I then go over the model with the render base colour and just go over any paint spillage just to neaten things up, and then I'll turn my attention back to the roof. I want to simulate bird poo stains and lichen on the roof, and I do with extremely watered down paint. You can use whichever you like, but my formula for this is Vallejo's Green Ochre, overlain by military green and then finally buff. Ensure that they are really watered down and they will mix better on the roof. Then using a large dry brush, drag the paint down in a single motion to simulate rain mixing with the staining. Have a look at roofs in your local area and you'll see what I mean. It'll also give you a bit of inspiration for this. Whilst that dries, I then turn to weathering the pavement and the garden path, and for this I use Agrax Earthshade, applied liberally all over the areas. This is a very good wash and it settles nicely around the raised areas. Once this is dry, I go back with the original stone grey colour and dry brush the areas again, just to bring out the raised cobbles and stones of the pavement and the path. Now this basic stage is complete, the house will require protecting for the next weathering stages, and for this I use Winsor & Newton Professional Artist Matte Spray applied with a rattle can. Make sure to do this in a ventilated area or wear a mask. Weathering is the fun part, and I begin using Florrie Grime Wash, a clay wash that settles in all the nooks and crannies and it is easily wiped off to leave the wash in the recesses. So apply this with a large brush and make sure you get very good coverage across the entire model. Then leave it to dry. When it is thoroughly dried, use a damp soft cloth to wipe off the wash with a downward motion. This will then simulate the streaks and dirt that's washed down from rainfall. You can leave areas with more grime where it is more heavily soiled. It's completely up to you. I then add rust streaks using a weathering pencil. I do this from the wall braces where they would naturally rust and streak down the walls. Apply the rust and then use a brush to streak it down the wall. You can also smudge it a bit with your finger. I do the same with a dirt coloured weathering pencil for various bits and pieces on the roof and under windows and other places where rainwater would stain the building. Then I use modelling powders to add tide marks around the bottom of the building where rain and dirt would accumulate. These come from Geek Villain and they're an excellent product. I use 2 different colours to blend the colour I want for this and then use pigment fixer applied from a pipette to hold the pigments in place. I let the fixer dry for at least 24 hours before another matte varnish to seal the entire model once again. Then, once everything is dried, I turn back to the garden. I use undiluted PVA glue to add static grass. You can use an applicator for this, but I don't bother. I simply blow on the grass when it's been added, and that helps it stand up a bit. I give the garden a bit of interest by adding flowers and other plants in the form of pre-bought tufts. These will just add that little bit of dash of colour that makes for an interesting tabletop model, and it also lifts the house a little bit. And that's it. Only a few hours work, not including the drying times, and you've got yourself a building waiting to be fought over. All the techniques I use are easily done and they just take a little practice, which is fun in itself if you're learning new ways of weathering. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe, check out my Patreon and also channel memberships if you want to help the channel out and get early ad-free access to any of my videos. Thanks for watching.